poses that our rigs are able to achieve. Now, to show that in a little more detail, here's an example of squash and stretch on an actual shot from the film Cars. So, this will have some audio as well. So, watch the shot, see if you can tell where the most squash and stretch is in this clip. And then I'm going to ask you afterwards where in the shot it occurred. So, make sure we have some volume, and let's see it.
Whoa, who's touching me? You have a slowly Guido Ifix. You make such a nice mule. You come to my shop. Luigi, take good care of you, even though you're not sorry. You buy 4 tires, I give you a full size spare after sort of money.
Look, I get all my tires for free.
Oh, look at your style, eh? You drive the hard bargain. Okay, we can make you a new deal.
Alright, so just like a normal conversation, anyone know, where was the most squash and stretch? In the face of the car. It's quite a lot in the face. Any other ideas where there might be a lot of squash and stretch?
The tires?
Tires?
Yeah.
Quite a bit. How about which part of the shot? Beginning, middle, end? Middle, yeah. It's subtle, but it's actually when one of the cars, Guido, I think it's the blue car, maybe it's Luigi. I think Luigi, when he crosses from screen right to screen left, he kind of ducks down and goes under. And during that motion, his shape elongates very much, and it really makes the animation seem bouncy and alive. And I'm going to show you frame by frame. So there is Luigi. Look how he turns into almost a flat shape, and then kind of stretches out and then settles again in his final shape as he does that. And you might say, well, motion blur is supposed to do that, but we find just the properties of the camera, just the shutter open close, is not enough to make something feel like an animation. You really need, in these motions, to kind of lean back, stretch down, and pop back up again. Almost like made out of rubber, even though they're a car. We find these sort of principles of animation can help our characters look appealing, even if they're a car. So, this applies to anything from humans to rats to toys. We tend to have a lot of squash and stretch. And this is a little bit different from some styles of animation. For instance, motion capture is often used for games. And it's tricky with motion capture, which is where you put ping pong balls on a character like that. It's tricky to get squash and stretch with motion capture because humans don't squash and stretch. The ping pong balls stay the same length apart. But we find with animation, you do need to sort of break the skeleton a little bit, go outside of what the original motion. So that's an example of what a lot of the animators work on. It's worth noting though, animators like often paying attention to acting. Animators consider themselves to be the actors of the studio, doing all the poses and expressions, adding a lot of the emotion. However, there's a lot of animation that doesn't necessarily support the acting, but just makes the scene look real and believable. We call it like secondary motion. Like if a character's wearing a necklace, having the necklace move realistically isn't important for the acting, but it's important to look believable. So often these secondary effects, we try to create them automatically with programming. And here's an example of a mass spring system we set up for the cars where on the top the animator has just made Sheriff drive straight, but on the bottom we were making it bounce as it pays attention to the ground plane, and he bumps in it and runs a small simulation with springs between the body and the tires to make it look like it's bouncing up and down realistically. Because we don't really consider sort of the suspension of a car to be part of the acting per se, but just something that's necessary to be believable. So we do procedural animation. The most extreme form of that is hair and cloth. No one wants to animate cloth by hand, especially something like this. So in this shot, we have Skinner grabbing Linguini and pulling this cloth. Now this is a very hard simulation to do. And the way we do it is by using basically these little grabs widgets where we can actually attract the cloth to them, animate on and off, and do that one by one as the grab propagates up the clothing. And you can see how we've sort of animated on the rest pose, the various grabs, and how that comes out in the final sim. This is a very hard shot to work on. Cloth simulation is hard to set up, hard to make sure it's stable, requires lots of parameter tuning. In fact, one thing I like to say is, here's another question. How many modeling TVs do you think work on a Pixar film? Any guesses?
20?
20. It's a good guess. It's usually more like 10, believe it or not. We don't have many modeling TVs. We find that modeling TVs can be very productive. How many simulation TVs do you think we have on film? This is at peak. We might, what I said with 10, started with 10, but it usually starts off with 1 or 2, ramps up and ramps off. What do you think the peak number of simulation TVs are? So take a guess. Pick a number.
20?
8? Fair guess. It's actually 30 often. So it's something you don't necessarily think about because many people start off learning modeling. And, you know, it seems like you always have to start with modeling. It seems like the most important part of the film. But for characters that are wearing clothing, if you want to make it look realistic, it's quite a labor-intensive art. And on some of our films, like Ratatouille and Brave, which have quite a lot of clothing, we've peaked at around 20, and I think Ratatouille had the record for 30 TVs at peak. So it's worth paying attention to, especially at the higher end.
Is that, you called it the grabber?
Yeah.
Is that proprietary? Is that Pixar only? Are you guys familiar with that tool?
If you use N-Cloth in Maya, I think it's called an attractor, potentially. But yeah, N-Cloth is the system in Maya. Houdini also has cloth. But yeah, it's a very challenging thing to do because the first part of it is actually tailoring, where you have to create the garments. And then after tailoring, you have to make sure it simulates correctly. And yeah, it's very tricky to set up right. But I know Maya has a system called N-Cloth. And Houdini's system is well known. However, our system is proprietary. David Barrett, who writes a lot of our tools in cloth, and Andy Whitkin, they both originally worked on Maya's cloth tools, but then left to work at Pixar later. And since then, we've sort of diverged in our approaches. And here's another example of some cloths in a shot.
Move it, garbage boy! You are cooking!
Oh, that was the same shot. That was the context. However, it's worth noting it's not just characters. Cloth finds its way into lots of props as well. Anything from tablecloth to some drape, like curtains, or even a book could potentially be made of cloth sim. For instance, here's a shot where we're actually using cloth simulation for the pages of the book as it's being turned. And I'm going to show you an example of what the animator animated and where the secondary motion is coming from. Oops, sorry, I clicked too quickly. So Remy's going to pick it up, see it's stiff on top, you see it folds over nicely. And that's a cloth sim. And yeah, so many things other than just character clothing are done with cloth. Now we also have another department that does simulation, but we break it out separately. So when we say simulation at Pixar, we often mean hair and cloth, which are pretty much present on almost every character. But there's lots of things like waterfalls or explosions or something like that, which you might think of as special effects, which is where the name comes from, effects. We have a department that does this. So water, explosions, fire, they're the effects department. And I'm going to take you through an example of what an effects TV might do at Pixar. So this is often something where we think of it more as for live action, but does apply quite a bit of animation as well. So I'm going to show you a shot from Cars where a road gets split in half by a telephone pole that's dragged through it, which cracks the pavement and creates dust. Kind of a hard shot. I'll show you how it might be done. So it's a little bit of a dark shot, but I'll go frame by frame. So what Effects often does to do a shot like this is starts with reference. What we need to do is have a road that was breaking apart. So we looked at what broken asphalt looks like. You can see it almost looks like a turtle shell, right? You know, you have little pieces that fit together. And there actually is a well-known technique in computer graphics called Worley or Voronoi diagram that gives you a turtle shell-like pattern. So we noticed that, you know, all right, it looks sort of like a turtle shell like Voronoi, but that's just the overall shape. You also have reference like this, where we actually have to show you broken up, where you have that turtle shell-like pattern, but it's clearly very, you know, broken up in the middle, and then it sort of flattens out towards the end and kind of peels. So what we ended up doing was a technique that's often done with effects. We pre-shattered the road into sections that kind of fit together initially, but then we pull them apart using rigid body dynamics. So to pre-shatter the road, what we did is, let's see, so we start with the subdivision surface that's extruded to create some thickness. Then we took the line that the telephone pole would take and dropped lots of little particles on the surface, so there's just a little particle simulation. And then we tessellated the mesh into little regions based on that turtle shell-like pattern. And the way it does it is you create a line in points in sections that are equidistant between 2 points. So you basically walk along the mesh. You figure out where are the closest, who are the 2 closest points, and where, you know, you're at that equidistant point, you create a line. And